I'm really delighted to introduce Victoria O'Meara from the University of Leicester, who is going to talk to us, as you can see there on the screen, about helping academics cope with the sometimes bruising nature of doing external comms. And this is something that we initially worked with Victoria and her colleague in Canada for a session that we did through the conversation for academics a couple of months ago, wasn't it? And so I was quite interested to think that, although obviously academics, as the people putting their head above the parapet, need to know this information, but also as people who are sort of frontline supporters of academics, and indeed the ones encouraging them to put their head above the parapet in the first place, I felt that this would be good information for you too. So I'm really delighted that Victoria is able to come. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Hello, thank you so much for being here. I'm Dr. Victoria O'Meara. For the past 4 years, myself and my collaborator, Dr. Jagris Hodson from Royal Roads University in Victoria, BC, who sends her regrets for not being able to be here, we've been studying the phenomenon of online harassment, specifically targeting academics, research communicators, those who are doing some sort of public scholarship. So I'm here today to share with you some of what we found from that work and think through a little bit what some of the supports we found through over the course of several years doing this, what's been actually helpful for people, and start conversations around how in media comms we might be able to support that work. So, not a surprise to anyone in this room, but press, public engagement, and impact work are key to how universities showcase their strengths, how they bring the insights of research to the broader public. But unfortunately, this work comes with risks, and particularly the risk of toxicity and harassment from members of the public. So the goal of today's session is to identify strategies of support that we can use to support researchers in doing that public engagement work that we're all hoping that they will continue to do. What I'm going to talk about for the next no more than 45 minutes will be broken into two sections. So in the first part of what I speak about today, I'll talk about what the state of affairs is around online harassment. So what is it? How big is this problem? Who's affected? What are the implications and effects of this for targets? And then in the second portion, I'll shift into thinking about practical strategies, and hopefully afterwards we can have some conversation around what that might look like. But to start, what is online harassment? So broadly speaking, online harassment refers to that intentionally abusive or harmful behavior directed towards individuals or groups through digital platforms. This sits along what Dunn calls a continuum of violence. So it's not something that just happens online, and so it's not that serious. As we're all probably aware, our online and offline lives are very much intermingled, and so this has reverberating effects throughout various aspects of life. The research is in on the impacts that online harassment has for targeted academics. It has psychological impacts, it affects them socially, it affects their personal lives, it affects them economically. There can be reputational damage or damage to a career that results from an incident of online abuse. It takes a variety of forms. You might think of hate speech or personal attacks, identity attacks as one form of online harassment. Also threats, so that might be threats of violence, that might be threats to sabotage, that might be threats to damage someone's reputation or some forms of blackmail. Spreading false information is something that also happens to academics a lot. So a perpetrator might spread rumors about their relationships with students or how they conduct themselves with students. That is a fairly common form of online harassment. There are also frequent efforts to undermine credibility and competence. So claims that they are a plagiarizer or claims that they don't have the credibility or the credentials that they claim to, or going on sites like ratemyprof.com and giving them terrible ratings and making up reviews, another form of online harassment for academics. Doxing, likely most in the room are familiar with what doxing is, but if you are not, it is the practice of seeking out private information about an individual and then publishing that online. So think about things like your home address, your telephone number, the address of the school that your children attend. That's doxing. Deepfakes is something that is increasingly a problem with AI becoming more commonly used. So deepfakes involves taking someone's image and manipulating it such that it looks as though they've said or done things that they haven't actually done. And then these can also be coordinated campaigns. So there are spaces on the internet where particularly hostile groups or hostile to specific types of academics will coordinate on campaigns to call to get them fired, so to make it look like there's a larger public outrage than there really is, or strategic campaigns to find information about these people, or explicit campaigns of targeted harassment. It arrives from a variety of outlets at academic stores. So social media is one, it's probably the biggest. Email is another big problem area where a lot of this harassment comes to. It might arrive on their personal blogs that they maintain as a space to sort of engage with ideas, or it might come to fruition on blogs of perpetrators. Online forums are another big one. Comments in press coverage can be a site of a lot of online harassment. So places like The Conversation, where there are comments under articles that academics write, that can be a site of online harassment. That's why moderation is so important. And then in some cases, it escalates to phone calls, posted mail, or even showing up on campus. So this is a growing problem. According to the Turing Institute, 30 to 40% of UK adults report experiencing online harassment or abuse. However, the amount of people who are reporting that online hate is actually much lower, and the number of times that action is actually taken by platforms is lower than that. So it suggests that a lot of this online harassment is passing without any sort of consequence. In academia, the problem is maybe slightly worse. So 74% of surveyed academics have experienced online harassment as a result of sharing their work online or engaging in some sort of media interview. And the reports of the type of abuse are on quite a spectrum. So it might be abuse, verbal abuse, targeted harassment or threats. There have been stoked and coordinated Twitter pylons, abusive posted mail, as well as email, calls for their resignation, and in the most serious cases, phone tapping, doxing, and stalking. And unfortunately, media coverage can exacerbate the problem, particularly when media coverage distorts or simplifies the arguments that authors are making. So this is one example from a few years ago where two researchers from Oxford Brookes and Lancaster University had their research on the monarchy's co-optation of Meghan Markle's feminism covered by the Times. And while the article itself was fairly nuanced, the headline that it was given sort of was reductive about what their argument was. And this line of argumentation was then picked up by other news outlets that ran with it and attributed those arguments to those authors, who then became subject to a campaign of online harassment and abuse. Lots of misogyny, lots of sexism, lots of horrible threats. And importantly, it's something that continues to this day when these authors publish new content. So important to note that when an incident of online harassment does seem to subside, it can continue to follow the academic for years in some cases. Despite the danger, there's external pressure. I don't have to belabor that to anyone in this room. You probably know more about impact and REF than I do. But it now forms 25% of the Research Excellence Framework. And REF 2029, as we've just talked about, it comes engagement and impact, with perhaps even more emphasis on communicating that work beyond academia. So there is, again, more of this expectation to engage in public forms of scholarship. And given the dangers that we've outlined, it seems to me that part of creating that research culture that is going to score highly in REF is going to be creating some sort of mechanism of support to show that you can protect or support the people who are doing this in the face of online harassment. So being able to provide that sort of support to faculty can be part of how you demonstrate that you have a strong research culture. The risks are not just to the individual researcher. There have been cases where failure to provide that kind of support can also do reputational damage to specific institutions. So this is a case out of New Zealand where a microbiologist is currently suing her employer because they failed in their duty to keep her safe in her employment. And this is while she was providing public information about the COVID-19 pandemic, and she was subjected to vitriol and targeted harassment. And so, again, this is something that there's the moral and ethical case for wanting to protect our people, but there is also a case for how this damages the public image of the institution and could potentially lead to legal problems. So what are the impacts? Recent research in the UK has found that as a result of online harassment, 20% of researchers thought about changing the subject matter of their work. So this is really a threat that is shaping research trajectories in specific ways. And 32% reduced their public appearances and their participation in public discussions as a result of having these experiences. So the very types of activities that we are trying to encourage our academic colleagues to engage in. More globally, myself and my colleague have done a survey of academics and how online harassment or experiences with it have affected them in their work. 55% reported losing confidence. 51% have reduced their productivity. 44% are feeling demotivated about their work in general. 35% it was so bad for they felt like quitting. 34% indicated they've experienced some form of long-term reputational damage that they're still trying to dig themselves out of. And then 32% have lost confidence in their ability to collaborate. More recently, we've also done a survey with the Conversation contributors. So we've partnered with the Conversation to send out a survey to their contributing writers about how online harassment is affecting these people. So 30% said that online harassment doesn't actually affect their work or how they approach it, which is great. But following right behind that is 28% who consider not expressing their viewpoint. 22% avoid writing about specific issues, or 13% become afraid, and 12% avoid writing about specific groups. So again, some of this speaks to that sort of withdrawal from some of that public engagement work as a result of a fear around being targeted with online harassment. I also wanted to pull apart that first no impact for you across gender, and we can see that there is definitely a difference here in terms of the perception of an impact or having some sort of fear around the threat of online abuse between men and women. And with that, that brings me to the point that online harassment doesn't impact everyone equally. It is our colleagues and academic staff who are from marginalized, disadvantaged, or underrepresented groups that become the target more frequently. They are more likely to experience extreme forms of harassment. So women are more likely to receive sexualized threats or comments on their appearance. And they're more likely to experience some form of harm from that harassment. So some of that might be emotional and mental health based, particularly if it's constant attacks on your identity. But in other cases, that's reputational harm, that they're having to spend a lot of time clearing up misunderstandings about who they are and what their work is. So it is these groups who tend to be spending more time preparing for or protecting themselves from the possibility of being harassed. And they're spending more time at the tail end when they are harassed trying to clean up things. So this is really kind of an equity and diversity issue in terms of who gets to participate in media interviews and gets to reap the benefits of them without having to spend all of the time that they could be dedicating to research dealing with the fallout of these things. So what I'm hoping from our conversation, we can move forward to think about how we might lend support so that these people in particular can reap the benefits of doing some of the media work that we want them to do. And I will note that the threat of that online vitriol turning into actual violence that enters our institutions. That happens in some instances, and that threat is more acute for those who are challenging norms, whether by their work being particularly subversive or something that challenges the status quo, or by their very identity if they challenge a norm. So our LGBTQIA folk faculty, our Black women faculty, these are the people who are really under threat by the fear of online harassment. And in some cases, like this case, it actually translates into physical violence. So this is a case from the University of Waterloo in Canada, where I am from, where a person walked onto campus and stabbed 3 people, having been radicalized by online discourse about gender. So not the happiest of examples, but something to underscore sort of the stakes of what we're dealing with. So let's talk about support. From the survey that we conducted with the Conversation contributors, 64% reported that they have received some sort of toxicity in response to the press work that they do. But 73% reported that they had no support at their institution to deal with that. They had insufficient support from their institution, or they didn't know if they had any support at their institution. So that, to my mind, suggests there's an opportunity for some form of communication around what is actually already there, but also then maybe thinking about what other supports we could also lend. And then 91% reported not accessing support from their institution at all. And this is what academic staff are doing instead. We've done research with groups who have been targeted with online abuse, and they're using very individualized coping strategies. So these are sort of the top 3 ways that academic staff are dealing with it. They're going it alone, so they're trying to take on their perpetrators individually and by themselves. They might decide to withdraw from online spaces and public scholarship activities. That was a big one. Or they're turning to close friends and families, keeping it very localized in terms of what who they're turning to for support. So they're not going to their institution. They're not looking to various departments that might be there to support them. Right now, they think it's all on them. And we found that there's a few reasons why they're not coming to institutions to report the harassment, to seek out help. It comes down to sort of 3 overarching themes. The first is there's a lot of fear. They're worried that they're going to be blamed, and they're worried that when they say, I'm being harassed online, the immediate question that comes back is, what did you say? What did you do? You probably shouldn't have agreed to that specific media interview. You probably shouldn't have said it in the way that you did. So there's a lot of fear that by raising this, that this is an experience they're going to, there's going to be sort of an investigation into what they did to cause it, and that's just more grief for the person. So they keep it to themselves for that reason. The second reason that they're not bringing this to institutions is a lot of skepticism. There is sort of a pervasive belief that there is nothing that anyone can really do. And I want to push back on that a little bit. To a degree, well, in one sense, there's nothing we can do in the way that we can't protect everybody from the possibility of experiencing online harassment. We can't stop random perpetrators on the internet from saying horrible, rude, mean things to people when we ask them to do public media work. That's not a realistic goal, and it's not what I'm suggesting we should be trying to do. But that's different from saying there's nothing we can do. We can do things to support people so that the harm that's incurred, the experience of that is less painful. But right now, the overarching belief is that there's nothing anyone can do. This is just the job. This is the gig. This is how it goes. And so I haven't told anyone because I don't think anyone would care or could do anything. The third reason they're not reporting is uncertainty. And this again comes to what maybe some internal communication around what the policies are around online abuse could be really helpful. So we've got a lot of reports from people who they're not sure who to talk to. They don't really know who you go to when an event like this is happening, who's the first person that's going to be able to help you, who needs to know. And the last thing anyone wants to be doing when they're, under attack and having a swarm of terrible emails and horrible social media DMs thrown at them is to be looking through policy documents to find out who's the appropriate contact. So they just don't know what to do. And they don't know what will happen when they do tell somebody. So that's another important part of this, is that they're unsure what the processes are that get set in motion by telling someone. So that lack of certainty also stops people from really coming to their institution for support. Okay. The last point that I want to make is that I think across academia, certainly, and probably journalism shares this as well, is that there is kind of a pervasive sort of thick-skin culture, that if you want to do this kind of work, if you want to engage publicly, you do have to toughen up. You need to be ready to take criticism. And I think it comes from an honest place, that the belief that the strongest argument emerges from sort of rigorous critique and debate in the public sphere. And that's sort of, a foundational belief of how we get to our strongest kind of argument in academia and also maybe in journalism. What I would say, though, is the suggestion that you just need to toughen up is really keeping people quiet, that this is keeping the problem hidden. And because it is probably the most marginalized among us who are shouldering the burden of that, it's maintaining sort of inequalities in terms of who gets to speak in the public sphere and who gets to reap those benefits of potentially engaging in media industries. So I think something we can do differently is try to foster a culture of care that can encourage public engagement and impact work that might do more than the suggestion that if you need to just have a thick skin and be able to take horrible comments if you're going to engage in this work. So with all that said, what are some strategies that we can actually use for tackling online harassment? The first thing that I would say is that you might be in a good position to help with assessing the risks involved in a particular piece of press work or impact work or some sort of public engagement event. You might, in your role, if somebody comes to you with a media request, or a researcher comes to you with an idea for something that they want to do as a public engagement or impact project, you might be able to assess the risk of that based on a few key points. So I'll start by saying that to an extent, there's no real safe zone for research. Work that might seem like it's uncontroversial can become sort of a lightning rod under the right circumstances. But there are a few key areas that we can reflect on that can help us make sense of whether or not there's likely to be some sort of public backlash maybe attached to this project. So the first one is if the research is about politically charged topics or the media request. So that will be context specific. In the US, politically charged topics would include things like abortion, like Black Lives Matter, like prison abolition. In Canada, anything about Indigenous rights or the land back movement, those would be politically charged topics. You'd be better positioned than I would to speak to specifically what the ones in the UK and England might be. But those are a good place to start in terms of assessing the risk of some backlash and being able to then think about how do we need to prepare. The second is hostile populations. So if this is a media request to have someone speak about white nationalist groups, if this is about conspiracy theories, anti-vaxxer groups, there are certain pockets of the internet that have really rabid fan bases. And so if there's a hostile population that is involved in whatever this public work is going to be, chances are, or there's a higher risk that there's going to be some sort of backlash against the researcher. You can secondly think about the methodologies or the findings that the researcher is using. So those can also be the site where some form of backlash happens against them. So with methodologies, if they're using particularly progressive methodologies, so thinking about feminist theory, if they work with critical race studies, queer theory, these are sometimes lightning rods for online abuse. Or if their findings challenge the status quo or powerful actors. So if you have researchers who are doing research on, let's say, platforms, and they have results that are going to upset people like Elon Musk that could be one site where you want to be aware that there might be a backlash about this particular topic. The third area of reflection is the researcher's positionality. We've already mentioned that it is the most marginalized amongst us who are more likely to receive this. So a researcher who is well established in a permanent full-time role, white male senior academic, their risk of receiving some sort of terrible backlash is less than, say, your precariously employed Black female early career researcher. So something also to just be aware of. And then finally, the researcher's visibility. So do they already have a public profile? Have they been subject to a social media firestorm before? That can be a good indicator that it might happen again, because then certain people are still watching for their activities. So all of those can help you assess risk. If you do see risk, there are a few things that you can do in advance. You can assign someone to monitor social media, pay attention to where that article is being published, and this can be the first line of defense for alerting the target as well as others in your own team that need to be made aware if things seem to look like they're going off the rails. So good sign of that is if the conversation's getting particularly heated, if people are starting to argue, if there is indication that people are starting to look for information about the researcher. These are all signs that, okay, we need to prepare ourselves for something that's coming. You might decide to prepare a statement of support in advance. It's nice to have that ready and good to go should the worst happen and you be inundated at your institution with phone calls and emails and calls for this person to be fired. That can be a good way to prepare. And then finally, alerting frontline staff. I've had a lot of conversations with academics who their main concern was the frontline staff who ended up being inundated with these phone calls and emails. So the frontline staff, I mean those people who handle the email accounts for the vice chancellors, let's say, or they answer the phones. These are the people who often are on the receiving end of a wave of online abuse, and if they don't have messaging or if they don't have training, it can be really overwhelming and won't be handled as smoothly as it possibly could. There's also guidance that you can give to researchers. So in the first, notify them. It's not necessarily always the case that researchers are going to be aware that their topic might be contentious. And as media professionals, you might have a better sense of what topics are going to be contentious. So if they're doing a lot of work in their own enclave, they might not know. So please, make sure that they're aware. You can also encourage them to develop a plan to minimize their harm, and I'll talk about that in a second, about doxing yourself. You can also share resources. So the Risky Research Guide was just published by the Association of Internet Researchers, and this is a collaboration amongst a global network of researchers who do risky research or research on challenging populations, et cetera. And they produced this guide to help navigate these difficult situations. So in thinking about how the researcher can minimize the risk, this is perhaps something that you can speak to them or encourage them to do, or maybe help them to do. You want to audit online vulnerability, and the first step in that is to search and find out what information is available about this person online. So search their name and their image on Google. You can encourage them to do this, or you can lend your skills as communications professionals to be able to do that. Note any platforms that they're visible on. So do they have an old MySpace page that hasn't been shut down? Do they have an old Twitter account? Do they need to archive their tweets? And then assess their social media privacy settings. So see what's public, get them at least to temporarily shut all of that down to the maximum privacy. Encourage them to secure any shared documents. If the researcher is working in Google Docs, they might have things set up so that anyone with the link can access their documents or their research tools. If they're collaborating with others at other institutions, they might be using this. So just remind them that they need to secure their shared documents. And then you can also encourage them to update security and passwords and use two-factor authentication. Also important to prepare by knowing the block and report tools. This is something, again, that you can encourage individual researchers to do. It's, again, one of those things that when you're in the midst of a social media firestorm, you don't want to be trying to figure out how to do this. So these change frequently, so they'll want to familiarize themselves with the most current process. And if you manage a social media for your own institution, that might be something that you want to consider refamiliarizing yourself with as well. Okay, so when something is published, there's research to suggest that you can preempt negativity with positivity. So there have been studies into what happens to the public conversation if the first few comments under a post are positive. And it has a measurable effect on the tone and the direction of the conversation. So you can use this strategically, where you set the tone for a positive interaction by having a colleague or yourself comment something positively about a publication announcement or a media interview right under it. You can coordinate with other people to do the same. This can do something to sort of shift the tone of the conversation. If the worst happens, we advise individual researchers to report, block, and document. But you can help if this is, I realize we're all pressed for time, but if you are able to help, there are a few things that you can do. So the first thing is to screenshot and file any abuse or harassment that you see. These are important to keep sort of a note of documentation of the abuse should the target want to pursue some sort of legal action, if this needs to be investigated by the institution. So a record of the actual harassment is key. So just screenshot anything that you do see. You can report abuse to platforms and block perpetrators. You can moderate comments on your own institutional social media. And you can help to arrange IT help. In some cases, the email is co-opted by an author, and so they can't get access to their own email or maybe their blog or their own social media. If you can set them up with IT who can maybe help them regain access to that, that's really helpful. Better still is to convene a support team across IT, security, comms, and their peers. So IT can get involved to, again, help them gain access to their own email accounts or to help them block specific emails from being able to contact them. Security would get involved if there are being threats, so they can walk them to their car. They can do some things to ensure their safety on campus. Comms can be involved in a way that helps to curb the online harassment that's coming, so they can do something to assuage the online conversation, specifically by putting out a public statement of support, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then peers, of course, for mental health kind of and emotional support. Okay. One of the most helpful things that we've heard in our research for people who have come under attack that a colleague or a peer or someone else has done for them is to take over their social media or their email or their phone. These are spaces that people need for their work, and they often become unusable in the course of an attack. So they become full of racist, misogynistic, horrible, violent messages, but people need access to these spaces for their work. And so to not have to sift through a backlog of horrible things said about you so that you can get at the actual work-related emails is a kindness that a lot of people really appreciated. So if you have the time and the capability to be able to sort of take ownership of those for a minute, to be able to file away the harassment and surface those things in their inbox that they actually do that are relevant to them, that's very helpful. You'll still want to document those abusive messages, so don't just immediately delete them. You can create a folder and store them away there. If there are certain email addresses or certain social media users that are repeatedly contacting someone, you can create a folder and send those messages directly to that space. I will say, if this is something that you're considering doing, you should inform the target that you are doing that. In some cases, people who are targeted don't want to see it, and so they're happy to have those things be forwarded away from them. But in other cases, they might want to monitor that to see if things are escalating, to see if they need to get the police involved, and so they want to be able to see it. So they just need to know where these messages are going. So if you do set up some sort of automated system to forward horrible messages away, make sure that the target knows that. And then escalate any threats. Tell the target, inform security. Okay. Just a couple more thoughts. All right. So, responding to toxicity. One of the most powerful ways that media and communications can show their support for academic staff and help to curb abuse and set the tone for the direction for a conversation is to release a public statement of support. Any public communication that's about the target or their work or the situation should consult with the researcher in question. Our research has shown that there can be a real erosion of trust between the institution and the individual targeted if they aren't put at the center of how are we going to respond to this problem, if they feel left out of those conversations. And in some cases, it actually exacerbates the harassment that they're experiencing. So certainly involve the target in those conversations about how to respond. Often they don't want to be named, they just want some confirmation that the institution is behind them. These choices about how to respond should be considered carefully. They can embolden perpetrators and exacerbate harassment. So there are a few cases in the United States where the institution put out a public statement that seemed to condemn the actual academic while still supporting academic freedom. And that actually intensified the abuse that they were receiving because people felt that they were validated in their response. So want to try to avoid that. Generally speaking, there's sort of three key speaking points that help to assuage the ongoing abuse, and that's one, to reiterate the institution's support for the targeted faculty member, reiterate the institution's commitment to academic freedom, and then explicitly condemning any abuse. So something simple that hits those three notes is usually the most effective. Now, responding directly to perpetrators is a bit more tricky. The general advice goes, don't feed the trolls. And generally that's fairly good advice, but in some instances, again, this is keeping people silent who otherwise want to defend their work or their reputation, and it is pushing certain people out of the conversation to just stay silent in the midst everyone else defining what your work is and what it means, and you not participating to suggest otherwise. So some people find it quite empowering to be able to speak back to perpetrators of this vitriol. If that's the situation for the targeted researcher, or if you're considering responding directly to people on the internet who are saying horrible things, there's a couple things to guide you in that process. Firstly, only engage if there is no threat of physical violence, if this person isn't close by, if they don't seem particularly hostile, if it's not likely to escalate, and if the attack itself isn't organized. So organized campaigns, it's not worth the time. This is from PEN America, who have a really excellent online harassment field guide, and I can forward it to anyone who's interested after this. Stay focused on the content rather than the speaker or the tone. This is just the best way to keep the conversation moving forward. If it just requires some clarification around an argument, that can be one way to do this. But don't get embroiled in long debates. Social media, it turns out, is not the public square where we're all having meaningful conversations that are producing insight. It can be a cesspool, and you might not change anybody's mind. So just kind of walk away and encourage your researchers and authors and academics to do the same. Okay, if you're harassed, I'll go through this quickly. Just speak up if this is affecting you. It can affect you even if you're not the direct target. So do ask for help, take breaks when you need it, call in your own support networks. And then finally, there are a few proactive strategies that you can put into place. So maybe you can develop some guidelines for community interactions that'll set the tone for conversations on your own institutional social medias if you manage some of those accounts. Alternatively, you might consider initiating a working group to review communications policies and protocols to assess the preparedness of your own institution to respond to an incident like this. So some questions you might want to think about is there an internal comm strategy to alert the necessary parties to coordinate on a response? If the institution was inundated with calls and emails tomorrow, do those frontline workers have some sort of messaging or training that they can fall back on? And then a third and final proactive strategy, I'm drawing from a really interesting initiative that's coming out of Trinity University in Connecticut, where a faculty member there has developed Faculty First Responders. And it does a series of things, but one of the interesting things that I think might be useful here is they've developed a list of usual suspects, and that is media organizations that are known to publish hit pieces on academics, and particularly academics who do progressive work. And they monitor those websites. So they'll create Google alerts to see when specific faculty members are mentioned, when specific institutions are mentioned, and then they can alert that faculty member or that institution around, hey, we think that a social media firestorm might be coming your way. Here are resources, here are what we can do. So there might be something to draw from in this. Is there a way to identify at least a list of the worst offenders or the publications where social media backlash kind of follows? Is there a way to set up Google Alerts so that you can be notified if something is potentially brewing? Okay. 2 more thoughts. This is a training module that myself and my collaborator have developed specifically for academic leaders. So this was designed in Canada, so it uses the language of deans and department chairs, but transferable to heads of school, etc. But we've done this on the basis of a series of interviews we've done with academic staff who've been targeted and what they needed from their institution. So please feel free to use that, share that. And then we're working on a list of resources. So this is kind of a living list. It's just a Google Doc at the moment, but it's a list of all the online resources that are available about online harassment and various guides and tools and instructions. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. I know that was way too long, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. So much information there, and I love a Google Doc. I love a Google Doc. Very, very helpful. Who's got some questions? One here, one there. It's making me run around. Any other questions? Okay.
Hi, I'm Charlotte from the University of Lincoln. That was really interesting. Thank you very much. I was just wondering, it might be a bit of a broad question or perhaps linked to more of a psychological viewpoint, but I was just wondering if in your research or perhaps your own thoughts as to why there's been this rise of either internet harassment, in-person harassment. Is it a mix of people thinking that they can just hide behind a screen and say whatever they want, or this growing internet toxicity that we're seeing, as you mentioned, there's lots of radicalized groups on the internet, hidden within the deep, dark depths of the internet, or perhaps just the influence of a growing, I guess, from significant people in power who are perhaps portraying incredibly derogatory and dangerous messaging, and then people obviously being influenced and radicalized by that as well. Yeah. So it's a bit of a broad one there.
That's a great question, and I think it's all of those things, definitely. I think that over the past, the political climate has a lot to do with it as well. I think that there's a way also that social media is designed to separate people into their specific camps, and we're seeing sort of polarization kind of result from that. So my background is in media studies, and so infrastructurally, even looking at the way that social media platforms are designed to segment different groups so that they can be sold advertising, that differentiation, that breaking people into their respective camps, I think is also surfacing in the political sphere. And so people are becoming tribalist and they are arguing with one another, and it's becoming quite a toxic place. But there's a lot of social political kind of reasons why this seems to be getting worse. And I would probably agree with you that it is getting worse. I think the other thing that you point to is absolutely correct, that there are extremist groups online that people can now find a lot easier and be sort of seduced into particular ideologies like the manosphere in ways that they weren't able to do in previous generations. So it's an intense problem.
Hi, I'm Michael Head from University of Southampton. I'm an academic who does comms, and I mean, I mentioned it to a few people earlier, but one of my areas is anti-vaccine activism in terms of addressing that. So I recognise many of the things. I think this is kind of a comment that all universities must be much more proactive with looking after their staff. And that includes, I mean, it's a brilliant presentation. I've got so many ideas to take back to Southampton we've started doing some work on this, but we need to do much more. And I think we need to look after university staff better. Often institutions are considering kind of the reputational value. We're very risk averse. Will this affect our student numbers, rather than thinking this person is having a bad time, we must look after them. So these tools you've given us here is brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'll encourage everyone here, most of us here will work at a university, to take some of this back to have that proactive approach. Because if I go to my line manager, or if any of us go to a line manager and say, I'm being abused, what do I do? I bet most of our line managers probably wouldn't know, actually. So that's the kind of culture we want to shift and inform and empower people in that manner. So yeah, but overall, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Yeah, we've done some research in Canada as well about that very topic, about what do line managers, how prepared are they? What do they know about this problem, and how ready are they to respond? And you're absolutely right that there is a hunger for, what do we do? What are the resources? Like, we're ready for them. But generally speaking, there's not a lot of understanding of how to address the problem. And so, I appreciate that. But I hope that this can be a starting point for thinking about what are some proactive kind of strategies we can implement.
Thank you. My name's Christian. I work at the Open University, previously worked at Bristol, and then at other sectors as well. And Bristol and Open University probably trigger all sorts of interesting areas of conversation, shall we say. I'm probably also not the only person in the room who has had a death threat, so I do know, for what it's worth, what it feels like. But more importantly than that, I've dealt with a number of colleagues, past rather than present, who have as well, for very seriously. I wanted to also acknowledge and thank you, though, that you extended. I know this is a very helpful focus on academics, but the people I know at the moment getting most abuse are not academic, they're student support. So I think that in itself is interesting. I'd also say, with a risk of being shot down, academics are piling on academics increasingly frequently as well, which isn't to justify any of it, but they then they use academic freedom in one direction, it doesn't come back. And that's on a whole host of conversations. My overarching take on this, because I spend, as you imagine, a lot of time addressing and thinking about this for a whole host of reasons I'm not going to go into. Ultimately, though, there's not much we can do, because what you're saying there is great, but there isn't a huge amount there really, because of the way the world is working at the moment, that we can really do. And what I worry about is institutions, not my own necessarily, wringing our hands and saying, yes, we've got some sort of duty of care, we've got some sort of way of blocking stuff. It makes stuff all different 6 months down the line when you unblock or you produce your next research paper. So I didn't know how you would think about balancing that, because I would be really worried about taking this. And the last thing I'd say is, if I said to academics, well, what are you working on? Do you think that's a bit sensitive? They would be rightly really annoyed with me. How dare you? Because they'd think that as me spinning it or controlling it. So I wouldn't ever do that. So it's, I know you know this, but it's a very, very difficult thing to over or undersell on.
Yeah, I can appreciate that that's difficult. And I would, definitely preface those conversations with that this is not a question of me suggesting you don't focus on the research area that you are. This is me preparing you for the realities of the possibility of an attack. Because I take that point, and like I was saying, we can't actually stop this from happening. So in that side of things, there isn't a lot that we can do. That is a problem for maybe legal scholars to think about. How do we actually put in place mechanisms that stop this kind of behavior? That's not my area, that's not what I do, but we can look at the other end of this, is that, okay, well, if we can't stop it from happening, how do we support people through it so that it doesn't hurt them as much? How do we protect them from the reputational damage? How do we create more funding should they need to move from their house for a short period of time because they've been having death threats or they've been doxxed? Can we provide funds for them to move to a hotel or something? There are material ways that we can make these problems less devastating for individual people. And so that's the hope of what we're doing.
Thank you. My name's Phoebe. I'm from Birmingham City University. Recently, we've had a number of trolling incidents and online abuse, and every time we've just heard, don't feed the trolls, shut down, don't say a word. How can we convince our head of comms, our higher ups, that doing a public statement is a really powerful tool, especially when academics are in support of it?
Yeah, I think continuing to make that argument that, Don't feed the trolls is not, it's been the sort of line for about the past 20 years around how do you deal with online harassment. And it's not necessarily protecting people. It's people are still incurring the damage of that negative talk online. They're incurring the reputational harm, and without actually being given the latitude to be able to respond, to correct things. Working in media comms, it should be clear to those leads that controlling that message is an important part of how we save someone's reputation, or how we mitigate future sort of harm against them. So I think it's a matter of sort of making the case. I think we can maybe lend some of the research to that. There hasn't been much yet, I don't think, on the actual reputational impacts of a positive message, but the anecdotal evidence from our conversations that we're having is absolutely there. Yeah, I don't know if that really answers, but.
Hi, I'm Chloe from University of East London, but I've actually only been there for a week. Before that, I was in learned societies and health charities. So I sort of wanted to add some people to the list of who we should be talking to, because when academics put out research, they have a network around them. It's not just the university, it is the learned societies that they might be part of, it's the conferences they're going to go to with it, it's the journal that they've published in, and it's the health charities or the science charities and organisations that they're involved in. So I think we need to get better anyway, for lots of reasons, at information sharing, and I wondered if you had a perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are so many, stakeholders in this problem that could do something in support. We're thinking currently about how do we get involved with academic publishers, and what can they do in their role when they're about to publish content to make sure that they're doing the most to support or protect their authors. I mean, just to say that there are absolutely a variety of stakeholders here, and I think if we could get conferences involved, if we could get professional associations involved, and find ways to connect across, our little silos to be able to create that kind of infrastructure of support, that would be fantastic. We're starting to think about ways to be able to do it, but I would be very open to collaborating with people here who might have ideas about how you build that network.
Thank you all for your questions. Any further questions?
Hi, sorry, more of a comment. It was a bit, I suppose, sad in a way that we were talking about the fact that one of the big asks from us to our researchers is for them to get out there and communicate and spread the knowledge, and we're putting them in this position. And then as an impact person, I was thinking, well, a large proportion of the time, the research that makes the big impact is probably the greatest risk, as according to your strategies. So we're not only asking our researchers to be highly engaged, we're asking them to be highly impactful, which is effectively putting them in sort of double jeopardy. And it's not a question, it's a bit disturbing. Anyway, sorry, on that happy note.
Go on, Thomas.
Sorry, just really quickly, I know we're running short on time. A lot of this kind of comes together from other questions, but I always feel that, particularly with the really emotive subjects or potentially high-risk research, almost the highest value you can get is from discourse where you have wildly different opinions. So is there any way or any advice you could give for kind of encouraging people to have enough of a tough skin to deal with that and actually get a genuinely interesting, insightful, engaging debate going, but then obviously not push beyond that point and not allow them to be in a position where they're getting piled on?
Yeah, I think if you do want to have sort of those nuanced, difficult conversations that maybe online is not the space for them, so that might be one strategy, because, I don't want the takeaway here to be that I think that we're not capable of kind of having difficult conversations and being able to have a sort of toughness around being able to accept criticism of your work. But there's to a point, it has to be about the work. It has to be in service of improving the work. And a lot of conversations online, that's not what that's about. It's not, in good faith arguments. So I think you just have to think very carefully about how you would put together a particular impact event around that. And I would suggest it's online is not maybe the best venue. Maybe these need to be more intimate, smaller, sort of in-person kind of events to create the environment that allows for that kind of deep and difficult conversations.
Victoria Mira, thank you very much. Big round of applause.